Okay. So welcome to Day-to-Day Social Work. I'm Ashley. I am a private tutor and I specialize in assisting people to pass the license exam in social work on the master's and bachelor's level. You can find me online at daytodaysocialwork.wix.com/my site. You can find me on YouTube and Facebook at Day-to-Day Social Work. So welcome to Sunday Social. And I will just wait for a few seconds to see if anybody's going to join us right now. And then I'm going to jump right into all of this material because I have a whole lot tonight. And that's why I wanted to start early so I could get it out the way and not make it so long. So going to wait a few seconds. Hopefully everybody had a good week, good weekend. And for those who celebrate Easter or Resurrection Sunday, then happy Easter to you all. So wait for just a couple seconds and then I'm going to jump right in because I have a whole lot. Hi, Demetrius. Where are you from? If anybody has questions, just leave them in the comment sections and I will get right back to you. Let's see, let me turn this off. I forgot about that. Anybody has any questions or anything, leave them in the comment section and I will address those as we go throughout this session tonight. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in with just some small stuff while we wait. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the next few weekends. I will be completely busy for like the next 4 weekends. So I'm not sure if I'll be doing the Sunday social or not for the next few weekends. I will be in Tennessee and then I'll be in Washington, D.C., and then I'll be in New York and I will be somewhere else. So I have a whole lot going on, but I don't know if I'll be doing Sunday socials for the next few weekends, but this information is going to be a lot to kind of hold you over. I will be checking in periodically, of course. Tutoring probably won't be as open. My schedule probably won't be as flexible for live one-on-one tutoring for the next few weeks as well because of the traveling that I'll be doing. But of course, if you want to inquire, then you can, and we'll work things out because I'll probably be taking my computer with me. Second thing I wanted to talk about is the meetup. So I put a post out on YouTube and Facebook. So for people who are able to come to the meetup in Atlanta, which I'm planning to be June 28th through June 30th, then please send me your email or leave a comment in the comment section and with your email address so that I can add you to like a list so that I can give the information out. So again, the meetup will be June 28th in Atlanta, 28th, 29th, and 30th. It's the weekend in Atlanta, Georgia. And I will send the details to those who want to attend. I don't want to keep posting it in the group because some people aren't going. So I don't want to bombard them with that kind of information. So if you are planning to come, or if you think you may want to come, then send me your information and I will make sure you get the information. It's going to be very informal, nothing major, nothing too expensive or anything like that. You don't have to stay at the same hotel as me if you want to stay somewhere else. I like to shop on a budget. Like I use Priceline and all these other different things and try to find the best rate on very nice hotels. And, you know, it's just, I'm a bargain shopper. So if you don't want to stay where I'm now, let me just say I'm a bargain shopper, but I like nice places. So that's why I use stuff like Priceline where I could get a 4-star hotel for like, you know, $80 a night or something like that. So, but again, if you don't want to stay where I'm staying, then that's fine. But again, all of that information will be sent to you in an email. Okay. So that's the meetup. And again, it'll be very informal. It's going to be like Friday. This is what I'm thinking. Nothing set in stone yet. But what I'm thinking is Friday night, we'll meet and greet. I don't club. I don't do like a lot of hard partying and drinking and that kind of stuff. I'm not a bore either, but I'm 32. You know, I'm over all that. Now we can go out to like a nice little spot and have, you know, a couple drinks and that kind of thing and just get to know one another or whatever. It won't be anything wild or crazy because again, you know, I'm 32 and I know other people are my age or older, some younger, some are married with families and that kind of thing. So Saturday will be completely focused on self-care, hoping to do something something fun and inexpensive, hopefully free. So I'm looking at some things for that. And then Saturday night, I'm hoping to look into like a jazz club or something like that. And then Sunday, hopefully brunch, and then we'll go home. So very informal, nothing too expensive, just a meetup for the weekend in Atlanta, which I think will be very fun. I'm hoping that Myra will get to come. Planned it so that she could come. So hopefully she'll get to come and you'll meet her as well. And I'll also ask some of my other social work colleagues and friends if they can come as well. So it'll be a good time. All right, so enough of that. The next thing I wanted to talk about is tutoring. So as you know, tutoring is back, ongoing. Live one-on-one tutoring is back up and going with all the new content for 2019. I made a video that's on the YouTube channel if you want detailed information about tutoring. Right now, today, like now, until 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the pre-recorded series is on special for just $100 because it's Easter. So I just did a flash sale. After that, it will go back to $150, which is a special in itself until the end of this month. Starting May 1st, the pre-recorded series will go back to $250, 45-day access, 15 videos, over 11 hours of content review, and it's great. It's phenomenal. So that's tutoring. Oh, and then also have the binge watch special, which if you can't afford to do the $250, I completely understand. You can do the binge watch for 7 days with the complete package for just $65. Okay, so that's that with tutoring. Next thing, I wanted to give y'all an update on my counseling just because, and I'm talking about all of the small stuff in the beginning of the video because I want to make sure that whoever's coming for the information has time to get in here. It's just 7:05. So with counseling for me, I'm so glad that I started counseling at the beginning of the year. It's been very helpful for me. I definitely encourage people to continue to look for therapy. I mean, I've been walking throughout life thinking that, I mean, not that my life is perfect, of course, definitely not that, but that I didn't have any issues. But when I went to therapy, I started realizing how my past is connected to my present and how I don't want that to also be connected to my future. So I've been walking around in life like everything is okay, and it is, but I hadn't made the connection between my childhood and my present life and the things that kind of conflict. And it's been very eye-opening and it's been therapeutic. So if you are considering therapy, then please do it. If you are hesitant because of stigmas, and we know about all the stigmas and stuff because we're social workers, but if you're hesitant because you just think that nothing is really going on in your life, like when they start digging, you will see just how much things are related to that you don't even think about on a daily basis because it doesn't bother you on a daily basis. But anyway, so counseling's going well. I started the 6 sessions through my EAP back in February. And so I have 1 session left, and we normally meet once every 2 weeks. So I told her I wanted that session to be a month out. So I'll go to her again next month for my final session. And then she's given me a few therapists that will accept my insurance so that I can continue therapy if I want to after I finish that last session with her. But if you have an EAP or if you have a low copay and you can afford therapy and you feel like you might benefit from it for whatever it is, then I would say definitely take advantage of it, because we want to kind of take away that stigma of therapy, especially in certain cultures and communities. So definitely make sure that people know that you're not crazy if you go into therapy and that kind of thing. So it's been helpful for me. All right. I just wanted to tell you all that because I've been talking about it since I started it, and I was kind of skeptical about it at first, not because of any cultural reason or anything like that. It was just because the incident that happened to me, I didn't think that counseling would be able to help. And I guess a lot of people think that way. So, but it has. So that's that. All right. So, and speaking of that, of course, as you know, I have the personal coaching. So if anybody is interested or anybody that's interested in personal coaching, I have those sessions available. And that's going to be my focus for this year is the personal coaching. And the tutoring will still be a priority, but I'm going to really try to ramp up the personal coaching because I am under supervision for my advanced license, and it's not therapy. It's coaching, though. It's kind of similar, but not therapy. And it's very, very, very affordable for people who don't have health insurance or who don't have the ability to pay hundreds of dollars for someone to help them through their challenges. So check out the personal consulting and personal coaching video that's on my YouTube channel, Day-to-Day Social Work. And again, it's been helpful. I've only done 2 sessions so far. And we talked about career goals, but the things that I'm able to talk with you about to help you through your life's challenges are listed on the website, which will be in the description box. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about, so this week, and normally the content that I get for these Sunday socials are from things that happen or things that came across my attention during the week, the work week. So this past week, I went to a training at the United Way here locally, and it was a presentation called Speaking Down Barriers. And it was really about labels and stigmas and preconceived notions and just all those kind of touchy subjects that a lot of people don't really like to talk about. So I thought it was very interesting. It's based out of Spartanburg, South Carolina. I don't know that they do sessions or trainings, nationally, but they have a website, and I will put that down in the description box below. But I did want to just talk about how we label people and how it can affect, especially children, and how a label that we place on children can affect them for the rest of their lives. I mean, kids who, especially when I was growing up, kids who were very hyper and they were diagnosed with ADHD and put on Ritalin and other kind of medications, that, and I've seen it in my own family where that label kind of stuck with people throughout their lives. And so I think that it's very important that we don't label people. And of course, as clinicians and as future therapists and things like that, we have to diagnose people. But a few videos back, I told you about a book that I had started reading called The Gift of Therapy. And one of the very first things that was stated in that book was that we should not be so quick to diagnose someone initially when we first meet them, because we're just meeting them and we don't really get a full picture of who they are. And so, in one session, in the first session at that, which, I mean, of course, I get it. We have to use the DSM-5 and diagnose, and people need to be reimbursed and all that kind of thing. But I think especially for people who are in private practice, I think it probably isn't a great idea to diagnose people and give them a label, because I've seen people who have been misdiagnosed, supposedly. 1 month they have this diagnosis, and then they come back 2 months later and they say, well, no, I went to this place and they told me I had this. And then it's just really confusing. So I think that when that book that I was speaking of, The Gift of Therapy, is probably talking specifically about people who are in private practice, who will be working with a client for a longer term. And so I think that if you know that the client will be a long-term client, you don't want to necessarily label them with a diagnosis immediately. Now, of course, you can have some thoughts about what you think is going on with that person in that first session, but just be kind of wary of giving labels, especially if you're not sure and you don't know. And that goes for anything. Like, I spoke on a panel a couple years ago at my undergraduate school, and they asked me to speak about, what I had been doing after graduation and how I prepared for my career as a minority. And so the first thing that I told the audience was that I don't see myself as a minority. Like, that's a label that I don't answer to. And I used to, but then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, I'm a woman, that's a minority group. I'm Black, that's a minority group. But like, why do I have to call myself the minority? Because that makes it seem like that other people are, kind of superior to me and that I'm inferior. And I don't see myself that way at all. So even though I'm a woman and even though I'm Black, nobody else is superior to me just because they might be a male or they might be a different race or whatever. So I don't answer to minority anymore. I don't call myself a minority. I'm Black and I'm a woman and whatever else. But even those are labels, and so then you start looking at race and gender and sex and that kind of thing. And so some people don't identify. Some people a person might look like me and not identify as a woman. They might identify as something else. And so then you have this whole spectrum of, genders and gender identities and that kind of stuff, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit later on in this session, because I have some notes on that too, but I'm not going to get into that because I'm not knowledgeable enough to really, teach on that. But, so all these labels, and I understand that sometimes we have to have labels, but, minority is just not one that I like to answer to or that I will answer to going forward. And so, they say that what's the saying? It's not what you're called, it's what you answer to or something like that. And I believe that that's true. Okay. So that's that. What else? So nothing else really interesting came across my desk or across my attention this past week at work. But so, I'm taking the psychodiagnostics class, which I have to take in order to get my advanced license. And so it's pre-recorded and it's modules, and I started on March 1st and it ends like July 31st or something like that. So it's at your own pace. And so I've been trying to really knock those modules out. And that's because I'm planning to do a lot of traveling. So I've been really heavy into that this week, which is where I've gotten most of my content for this week for this week. So I will be going over that in just a second. But one thing I did want to talk about that I had been noticing a lot was that they call it alphabet soup. So you meet people, you go to presentations and you see Jane Doe, with these credentials. And you're like, well, what does all this stuff mean? So it's just like credential after credential after credential. And so I wanted to just speak briefly on that. And I have a link that I'm going to post down in the description box. But for me personally, I don't really like to use a lot of letters behind my name other than LMSW. And that's just because, I don't know, like kind of credentials and all that kind of stuff, they matter, but they don't really mean a whole lot to me. And so the only thing that means a lot to me is just the LMSW at this time. But I've seen people, they will put MSW, LMSW, LISWCP, and all this stuff, which to me is kind of redundant, because if you have a license and you're a social worker, it's kind of understood that you have a master's degree, because you have to have in social work, because you have to have the master's degree in order to get the license. But, some people are just a little bit different. So I wanted to make sure that, if you are one of those people that like to list all of your credentials, including your bachelor's degree and all that kind of stuff, I think it's important that we explain to people what they are, because a lot of times we'll go to presentations and they'll have the PowerPoint and they'll have the person's name with all these letters, but they never really tell you what all of them mean. And I don't know if people just assume that you know what they mean because you're professional, but a lot of times I don't know what half of that stuff means, especially when people come from different states where the credentials may be a little different. So I think it's important that we tell people what our credentials mean. And some people will ask you, and I think that's good too. But I think it's important when you are introducing yourself to let people know, your experience and what your credentials are. Okay, so the link though that I was telling you about, because I Googled it, I'm like, well, how do you know what credential to put first and that kind of thing? So basically what I found was, let's see, it says place professional credentials after your name, starting with academic degrees, followed by professional licenses, and with certifications listed last. Use abbreviations and separate them with commas. The highest academic degree is placed first. Then you list your licenses and certifications in the chronological order in which you earned them. So then it says, suppose someone has a master's degree in sports physiology, a bachelor's in biology, a license as an emergency medical technician, and certification as a water safety instructor. The signature should read Jane Doe, MSW, BS, EMT, WSI. I'm sorry, to me, that's just overkill. I get it, but I know some people just like that kind of stuff. But so it says, like I said, you list your highest academic degree is placed first. So they listed the master's degree first, which was the master's degree in sports physiology, and then their bachelor's degree in biology. So it was MS, BS, and then they listed the licenses or certification in chronological order in which they received or in which they earned them. So then they put the EMT and the WSI. So we call it alphabet soup, but people might call it something different where you're from. But, I know people are very proud of their education and their credentials, and I'm not knocking it at all. So just wanted to just give out some information about how you should list them correctly. And then I also saw where it said that if you have on your resume, you should only list your credentials at the top of your resume if you are a doctor. So that's just something interesting that I came across, because I have on my resume LMSW at the top, Ashley Harp, LMSW at the top, but I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to. So, okay, so that's that. And then let's see what else here. And then I also found another resource that has a state-by-state guide to your social work licensure. So it tells you what you need according to your state, how many hours, what degree you need, how many hours of supervision, and all that kind of stuff. And I'll post that below too. And that's just mswguide.org. Okay, so now that all of that is out the way, let me check and see if there are any questions. And then I'm going to get into the meat of this. Let's see. Catherine Harris. Hello, can you explain the advocate, facilitate, and intervene out of the acronym? What acronym are you talking about? Advocate, facilitate, and intervene. Are you talking about therapy? I personally don't use the acronyms, and I don't really recommend that people use the acronyms, because a lot of times the answer choices on the questions are not cut and dry to the point where you can actually use the acronym. And for me personally, it only confused me. And so I don't really use the acronyms, but I can tell you how to use them. But I teach you a different and new strategy in my tutoring that is way less confusing than using the acronyms. Okay, so just let me know, Catherine, which acronym you're talking about, and I'm going to go ahead and get into the information that I wanted to give. So like I said, I've been taking psychodiagnostics, and I wanted to come on and talk about some of the information that I've been learning. It's been very helpful, and it's really kind of like a review for the most part, but some of it is not a review. And, some people have not taken psychopathology. So I took psychopathology in undergrad, and psychodiagnostics is another course in South Carolina that we have to take in order to take the independent license clinical exam. So I wanted to talk about PTSD, OCD, and I did a module on DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, but I'm not going to talk a whole lot on that because, it wasn't thorough enough. So I'm not going to talk a lot on that. And then I'm also going to talk about some paraphilias, which I thought were interesting. So, okay. So the first thing, let's see here. The first thing is PTSD. So post-traumatic stress disorder and OCD and related disorders. So I'm not reading this word for word. Again, it's probably a review for most people, but I just want to point out some things, including the changes from DSM-4 to DSM-5. So we know that trauma must be present in order to receive a PTSD PTSD diagnosis. So I'm going to push this back so I can have room for this book here. So PTSD, most of the time, people, of course, think about someone who has been in war. And I guess that's the most frequent example that people use when talking about PTSD. But you can also have PTSD from other events, like a car accident, a rape, a robbery, a breakup, witnessing abuse, and all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, the most frequent example that I've heard is someone being in war and being exposed to a lot of things that they probably would have been better off not seeing. And so that's the most frequent example. Okay, so in the DSM-5, there's a new chapter, and it's called Trauma and Stressor-Related Disorders. So in that chapter, it is reactive attachment disorder, disinhibited social engagement disorder, PTSD, acute stress disorder, adjustment disorder, and other specified trauma or stressor-related disorders, and unspecified, so other specified and unspecified, so 2 different categories. So I'm just going to talk briefly about each one of these because I think this is a really good review. And a lot of times people don't realize that these Sunday socials are really good reviews also for the exam and content that's going to be on the exam. So make sure that you browse through the Sunday socials that have already been posted and kind of look in the description box to see what topics were covered, because you might find something there that might help you when studying for your exam. So reactive attachment disorder basically it happens in childhood, and it's when, most of the time, it's when a child does not make a proper bond with their caregiver, mostly a parent, mostly a mother, can be a father too, of course. And so they have difficulties building relationships in adulthood, and it makes it very difficult for them to trust and to have genuine relationships in adulthood. So anytime you hear about reactive attachment disorder, it's because maybe there was some neglect in a person's childhood. Well, it's a childhood disorder, but if you hear about an adult who had reactive attachment disorder and now they're not able to form trusting relationships as an adult, then that could possibly be why, because they had a reactive attachment disorder as a child. So the second one is disinhibited social engagement disorder, and this is kind of like the opposite. This is where children have no regard, like they don't have any boundaries. So you might see a child just run up to strangers and hug them and want to sit in their lap and play with their hair and talk and do all that kind of thing. They have no boundaries. They have not been taught, limits and that kind of thing. So they don't attach appropriately or correctly. They want or need attachment so badly that they do it inappropriately. They don't understand social boundaries and become targets for victimization. And so that's important to know. And like I said, these are just little tidbits that I want these to kind of get you to thinking, okay, maybe I don't really know about this. I need to study and brush up on this for the exam. So, and with these exams, you don't know what's going to pop up on them. And so it's really good to just kind of know a little bit about everything, even though we won't know everything about all the information. Of course, nobody will. So I have an example of that. When I worked in the transitional housing facility, there was a little girl who she was all over the place. Like, she was so friendly. She was just, now looking back with the information that I've learned from school and from being in the field, I think that a lot of things were probably going on with her, but she definitely was very friendly. She would jump in your lap and she would want to talk to you and she would want to rub on you and all this kind of stuff. And also her mother had some challenges growing up as well that she disclosed. And so a lot of this stuff is intergenerational and it kind of goes from generation to generation. And so just be aware of that. If you work in therapy and you work with a child who has signs or symptoms of this disinhibited social engagement disorder, you might want to also look at the parent. Of course, you're going to look at the family as a whole when you work with a child. Definitely, you want to see, what's going on with that parent and see how the parent is parenting and how you can help with resources or therapy for the parent. And so then the next disorder is PTSD, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The next disorder is acute stress disorder. So acute stress disorder is kind of the same thing almost as PTSD, but it's not as severe. So with acute stress disorder, the symptoms have to last for 1 month or less, and it doesn't continue on into PTSD. So with PTSD, your symptoms are a month or longer. In acute stress disorder, your symptoms are a month or less. And so I don't know why this phone is vibrating so much. Okay. So, as a matter of fact, I'm going to put this over here because it's distracting me. Okay. So the acute stress disorder, again, it's the disorder that you can diagnose before it gets to PTSD. So let's say that somebody is having triggers or they're very anxious. Let's say that they had a car accident and they are afraid to drive. And let's say that they are just afraid to drive for 3 weeks and then they feel like they can drive again. So, but during those 3 weeks, they had significant distress about driving and, they get anxious, they get panicky and that kind of thing. You might diagnose them with acute stress disorder. But if those symptoms last longer than a month, then you might want to start looking at PTSD. So the next one is adjustment disorder. And this is where a person doesn't respond well to new situations, crisis, or trauma given their age and developmental stage. So I had a patient recently who was diagnosed with adjustment disorder, which is what she told me. And this was a child, and the child's family member passed away. And so the child was very close to the family member and was not able to cope and had gone into therapy, and they diagnosed her with adjustment disorder. Now, this is kind of tricky, I think, because, and with these disorders, you want to make sure that you go and look and do your own research in the DSM-5, because I'm not going to list out all the symptoms and the criteria and the number of symptoms you have to meet in order to get the diagnosis. But I'm, again, just giving you surface because this is just an hour-long talk. But adjustment disorder, you could have a breakup and be diagnosed with an adjustment disorder. So depending on how you respond. So people who don't respond well, then you have to look at what is typical. What is a typical response to a breakup? What is a typical response to losing a family member? What is a typical response to moving across the country? That's an adjustment. So be sure to look in the DSM-5 if you want to know more specific information on adjustment disorders. But in general, it's just that people don't respond well to a new situation, crisis, or trauma given their age and developmental stage. It can be specified also with depressed mood, with anxiety, with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, and with disturbance of conduct, and with mixed disturbance of emotions and conduct. So again, if you want to do deeper research on that, look in the DSM-5. And then the other two disorders, or the other two items in that section, is other specified trauma or stressor related disorder, or unspecified trauma or stressor related disorder. And for these two, the client meets a majority of the criteria needed in order to have one of those diagnoses, but they don't meet all of them. And so with those specifiers, those have really been kind of confusing for me personally, because I haven't had a lot of practice. I haven't had any practice really with diagnosing anybody in general. But when you start looking at the specifiers, that's when it kind of gets a little tricky. So I'm going to have to I guess wait until I'm in practice or either talk about it with my supervisor. That's a good idea. I'll talk about it with my supervisor, my LISW supervisor, when I meet with him on the weekends and ask him about using specifiers. So, okay, so now in the DSM-5, PTSD is no longer an anxiety disorder. So it's primarily a disorder of reactivity along with specific and social phobia rather than a syndrome such as major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. So, and you're reacting maladaptively. So PTSD in the DSM-5 is no longer an anxiety disorder. It's more reactive rather than a syndrome, is what it's saying. So anxiety is present in most psychiatric disorders. It is not particularly sensitive and specific to post-traumatic stress reactions, normal or abnormal. And a number of symptoms observed in PTSD, such as numbing, alienation, and detachment, are similar to those of major depressive disorders. So again, we're going to get into a lot of these disorders, and I don't want you all to get confused because it is a lot, and a lot of these are similar to one another. So make sure, again, if you don't have a DSM-5, you can find it online. Normally for free, or you can find it at a reduced rate on some of the websites that you can buy textbooks, like Chegg.com, ValourBooks.com, and all of those other websites that we used to get our textbooks from in grad school. So let's see. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff because I don't want to keep y'all on here all night. Acute stress disorder. Okay, so symptoms of PTSD: depersonalization, or feeling like you're, outside of yourself, not in your own actual life. Numbing, where you literally feel kind of empty or numb. Dissociative amnesia, forgetting things. Intense anxiety, of course, that anxiety that you feel physically within your body, like you know how you feel jittery and that kind of thing, and you feel like a hot flash roll through your body, that intense anxiety. Nightmares or flashbacks. Hypervigilance, and always being on alert, and just being, somebody just happens to slam a book down or a book falls on the floor and you jump. That's hypervigilance. And impairment of everyday functioning. So what I've been learning is that the brain, of course, is so powerful. Like, to go through a crisis or some kind of undesired event and to have dreams or nightmares about them and flashbacks about stuff that kind of relates to that incident. The brain is so powerful. When I first started doing my supervision, I told my supervisor that I'm not clinical because I've always done case management work. And I just don't see how I'm going to learn to be clinical because I don't want to be the by the book therapist that's sitting there telling people, about their lives according to these theories and that kind of thing. But now that I'm actually doing my supervision, I'm starting to turn my way of thinking because I'm exposed to a lot of this information, and now it's starting to click for me and starting to make sense. So maybe I can be a little clinical, but I still want to be able to talk to people and reach them on a realistic level as well. But part of this clinical supervision, we talk about the brain and how it reacts, and how the dendrites and synapses and all these misfires and all this stuff in the brain is so neat. Because I can talk about a personal example where I had an incident happen and I had a very vivid dream, a nightmare rather, and how everything lined up to mean something to me that I kind of interpreted a certain way based on the situation I was going through. The brain is just powerful and amazing, and now I want to learn about the brain. So go figure. Never thought I wanted to know about the brain. But anyway, so definitely when people start having flashbacks and nightmares and all that kind of stuff, it's hard. Because you can't control it. Like some people don't want to sleep because they know the possibility of having a dream or a nightmare and how it can, affect them emotionally. So PTSD, Again, depersonalization, numbing, dissociative, amnesia, intense anxiety, nightmares or flashbacks, hypervigilance, all of those are symptoms. And then with acute stress disorder, it's an anxiety disorder, develops during the month after a traumatic event and lasts 2 to 4 weeks, as we said before. And then it went on to talk about some treatments for PTSD, like CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which deals with your thoughts and thought stopping exercises, medication, exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is something that I think that I would like to do a lot of and learn more about, because even in personal instances, I've avoided things that bring up bad memories or negative emotions for me. And it's just seems easier to just not deal with it. But exposure therapy is making you face it head on and helping you to realize that being exposed to a certain situation or place or thing that causes you anxiety or causes you stress doesn't necessarily mean that, something bad is going to happen. So if I had a car accident and I ride past that scene, nothing bad is going to happen to me just by riding past the scene. So instead of me avoiding that area or that scene where the accident happened, I need to be exposed to it so I can realize that, hey, it's okay for me to ride by here. Nothing's going to happen. I'm not necessarily going to have another car accident just because I go by this place and that kind of thing. So, and then they also talk about EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So I've heard very briefly about the EMDR, haven't had any training or any, dealings with it, but I've heard a lot about how it deals specifically with the brain and your eyes moving certain ways and how that is supposed to connect with your brain and help you to cope and deal with stress and trauma. So I'm probably going to do a training on that at some point, and then I'll come back and tell y'all about it. So that's that. So the next thing was OCD. So obsessive compulsive disorder is a disorder characterized by recurrent obsessions or compulsions that are inordinately time-consuming or that cause significant distress or impairment. So then they went on to talk about the differences between obsessions and compulsions. And I don't think that a lot of people really know about the differences in obsessions and compulsions, because I think a lot of people know what obsessions are, but they don't really understand the compulsions part. So an obsession is a persistent and intrusive idea, thought, or impulsive image. So intrusive thoughts or ideas, like, somebody might intrusively think, oh, I wish my dog would die, like out of nowhere. That's an obsession. An obsession is persistent, intrusive thought or idea or image. So I haven't had any images, but I've definitely had some intrusive thoughts and it's kind of like a Freudian slip where you kind of think about something that you're not supposed to think about, but it just pops into your mind anyway. And so again, like saying that you wish the dog would die or something like that, and it just is not something that you plan to think, it just happened. A compulsion is a repetitive and seemingly purposeful behavior performed in response to uncontrollable urges or according to a ritualistic or stereotyped set of rules. So the compulsion is more of the repetitive actions that you see in the OCD, and the obsession is the obtrusive thoughts or persistent intrusive thoughts. So I kind of thought for a while that it was kind of like the other way around, because an obsession I thought was, having to touch the doorknob like 5, 10, 20, 100 times, but that's actually a compulsion. So the obsession is the intrusive thought, idea, or image, and the compulsion is the repetitive and seemingly purposeful behavior performed to respond to an uncontrollable urge or according to a ritualistic or stereotype set of rules. So it's seemingly purposeful, but it's not. So let's say that I have to wash my face over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's a compulsion because it's repetitive and it's seemingly purposeful, performed in response to an uncontrollable urge. So I could have the urge to, because I think that my face is going to be dirty, so I have to wash it over and over again. So even though it's seemingly purposeful, it's not purposeful, and it's repetitive, and it's in response to that uncontrollable urge or thought that, you know, if I don't wash my face, then something bad is going to happen. And so, you know, I wash my face 20 times a day, and then you start dealing with skin issues and all that kind of stuff. So OCD is not obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Those are two different things in two different sections of the DSM. Let's see. And OCD is increasingly being understood as a genetic disorder. So again, obsessive compulsive disorder is not the same thing as obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Which we'll talk about that in a second. So obsessive compulsive personality disorder is a personality disorder, and it's in cluster C of the 3 clusters. And again, we'll talk about that in a second. Let's see. So then they talk about treatments for OCD, which includes CBT, exposure therapy. We watched a documentary in the psychodiagnostics course about a child who has OCD and the intrusive thoughts or the obsessions that he has and the compulsions that he has. And some of the things are like really, really scary. Like I won't mention some of the things on here just because it's YouTube. But for example, though, the exposure therapy on the documentary, there was a child on there, or she was a young girl, probably a teenager, and she said that she was afraid to get HIV. And so part of her exposure therapy was to go into the HIV/AIDS clinic and just stand there. And so she said when she first got into the clinic, she started feeling a little anxiety. But as she stood there longer, she started realizing, you know, that just being in the clinic, nothing bad was going to happen to her. Same thing with the car accident, you know, just going to the scene of the accident or where the accident occurred is nothing's going to happen to you. Or if you're afraid of Christmas trees and, you know, it's December and there are Christmas trees everywhere downtown, you know, just going by the Christmas trees aren't going to cause you any harm. So that's that. Then they got into the whole personality disorders. So a personality disorder is an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from expectations of the individual's culture. Culture in this sense being, you know, the mainstream culture, or American culture, just as example. So the behaviors are pervasive and inflexible. Onset is in adolescence or early adulthood, and it leads to distress or impairment by the client and those around them. Poor relationships are the outcome of the personality disorders. So then, of course, we have 3 clusters of personality disorders. You have cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. I made a video on this like a while ago. That's on the YouTube channel, which I probably need to update. But I guess I can do that now. So cluster A personalities are paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal personality disorder. So paranoid personality disorder is distrust and suspiciousness of others' motives are thought to be malevolent. So this is a person who is always suspicious of other people. They are very distrusting of other people. I saw this a lot when I did my internship in grad school. I did an internship at the area mental health center and did day groups with people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and depression. So it was very interesting to see people with these disorders and how they are in their regular everyday life. So they were high enough functioning to where they could come to day groups 5 days a week and participate in these groups and talk about activities of daily living and independent living skills and that kind of stuff. And some of them lived on site. And so to be around people who were actively experiencing psychosis and who were actively in episodes of paranoia and out of touch with reality and stuff, it was very fascinating to me. And I'm so glad that I got to go and experience that and learn that, because a lot of people are afraid of people with these disorders. But depending on their level of functioning, you know, they just are different, and that's not a bad thing. So, but yeah, I saw a lot of people that were very distrustful. They were very suspicious, and they even had the look of suspicion on their faces when you would just talk to them, you know, and just be nice and pleasant with them. They were always distrusting, very to themselves, very isolated, and sometimes they would participate, but other times they were just not feeling it. Schizoid personality disorder is detachment from social relationships, restricted range of emotional expression, and very flat affect. So schizoid is basically people who are detached from social relationships and isolated states of themselves. Then you have schizotypal personality disorder, acute discomfort in close relationships, cognitive or perceptual distortions, eccentric behavior, difficulty maintaining what is reality and what is not. And so that one is a little bit more congested with information. So again, these are just brief overviews. Make sure that you look at these and understand them when you're doing your independent study. Then we'll look at cluster B. So cluster B is the antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. So antisocial personality disorder is disregard for and violation of the rights of others, lack empathy, lack remorse, and can learn a remorse response that is not natural. So people with antisocial personality disorder can learn how to be empathetic, but it's not genuine. So they mirror you. And a lot of these in cluster B have an overlap. So some of the same kind of symptoms and things that you would see in a person with antisocial personality disorder could be some of the things that you would see in a person with borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. So it's kind of hard to distinguish between the two. That's why it's important for you to look at your DSM-5 and see what the specific criteria is for each one of them, and make a diagnosis from that if you're going to be diagnosing people. Borderline personality disorder, instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image and affects, and market impulsivity. They may feel empty, no purpose in life, and abandonment issues. So we also looked at a documentary in my psychodiagnostics class about borderline personality disorder. It's very interesting because it's a very fine line between some of these, and it really is hard kind of to distinguish between, you know, 2 or 3. But an instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image. So in the documentary that we watched, it was a lot of people talking about how it was one lady in particular who said that she had made a friend with someone, and they were in grade school at the time. And so the friend ended up losing weight over time and becoming friends with other girls at the school. And so this person who had borderline personality disorder could not accept the fact that the girl stopped hanging out with her. And so she ended up writing her a letter in her blood and sending it to her, telling her that she loved her and she needed her and that kind of thing. And so in that particular documentary, the people with the borderline personality disorder, they knew that something was not right with them, quote unquote, but they couldn't figure out what it was. And some of them, this borderline personality disorder showed up later on in their lives. And so again, do your research on that. Histrionic personality disorder, excessive emotionality and attention seeking, can be physically different from one session to the next, and emotional states vary as well. So histrionic personality disorder is the one that they always say these people are very theatrical and very overdramatic and just always having to be the center of attention and everything has to be about them. And like this says, excessive emotionality and attention seeking. So again, it's all about them. They can be physically different from one session to the next. So they might change up their style of clothing. They might change their hair color. They might change, you know, whatever else that is physical that you can change. And it says, and emotional states vary as well. So again, they could be very, very happy, and not to be confused with bipolar disorder and moods and that kind of thing, but they can be very, very happy in one session, or in the next second they can be, you know, sad and that kind of thing. So a lot of these disorders, you also have to make sure you rule out other things to make sure that it's not a bipolar disorder, or it's not, you know, depression and that kind of thing. And then narcissistic personality disorder, which, you know, I've taken a very keen liking to because of just personal experience, but grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. They have to be right most of the time, no apologies. And if they do apologize, it's not sincere. Everyone around them has a problem, but not them. So they're always shifting blame to other people and, you know, making sure that it's not their fault and blaming everything on you and all that kind of stuff. So cluster C, avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder are all in cluster C. So avoidant personality disorder has a social inhibition, feeling of inadequacy, and hypersensitivity to negative evaluation. So they don't like to have negative feedback. They're very sensitive people. Avoids conflict or speaking out, plays the victim, and can't take feedback well. So that's kind of self-explanatory. Dependent personality disorder. These people are submissive. They have clingy behavior. They need people to make every decision for them. They have an excessive need to be taken care of and avoids making decisions. High risk for abusive relationships. So like I said, a lot of the stuff we just read in the book and we say, okay, I know the symptoms, but when you see this stuff in real life, it takes on a whole different meaning to you. I mean, with the narcissistic personality disorder, which is in cluster B, you know, I read about it and stuff, but when I actually saw it in action, it's completely mind-blowing. So, you know, if you need to watch documentaries, watch stuff on YouTube, just, I mean, Google and YouTube are your best friends when it comes to this exam. And when it comes to just practice, then you can't trust everything, of course, but, you know, if something is .org and, you know, .edu and that kind of thing, those are the more trustworthy sources that you can kind of get information from, but, or .gov and that kind of thing. But, you know, look at some examples or some documentaries or videos, legit stuff with interviews with people with these disorders so you can get a better understanding of it. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder is chronic preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and control, difficult to get along with others, views world in black or white, all areas of life versus OCD. Okay, so now this obsessive compulsive personality disorder, these symptoms are in all areas of life, whereas OCD, without being a personality disorder, is very specific to, you know, counting trees or touching the doorknob or coming back and making sure that you have to turn the stove off. But with obsessive compulsive personality disorder, it's chronic preoccupation in every area of their lives with orderliness, perfection, and control. So again, make sure you do your research because I don't want to, you know, keep trying to drive the point. And then there's an alternative model for personality disorders in the DSM-5 on page 761 that focuses on 6 out of the 10. We're going to skip through some of this. Diagnosing borderline personality disorder. So I'm going to read through just a few of these. So in order to diagnose borderline personality disorder, 5 of the following have to be present: avoid abandonment or fear, unstable, intense relationships, unstable self-image or no sense of self, emptiness, impulsivity, recurrent suicidal behavior or gestures or threats or self-mutilating behavior, reactivity and mood or mood swings, inappropriate, intense anger, stress-related paranoia or dissociative symptoms. So again, just look at your DSM-5 and that's all in there. Same thing with the antisocial personality disorder. So of note though, with conduct disorder, so this is the one that you always see with conduct disorder. So if the symptoms of, lacking control and not having regard for laws and that kind of stuff, if that kind of stuff begins at age 15 or so, then that is more likely going to be a conduct disorder. Then when you turn into being 18 or older, having those same kind of symptoms ends up being an antisocial personality disorder. So make sure you know that. That's a recall question on the exam and in the study material. So if you see that, if someone is under the age of 18, they can't be diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder, but they more than likely have a conduct disorder. So make sure you know those differences. Let's see. Okay, and then it says that people in a lower socioeconomic environment and males are more likely to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, which they had no backing for that statement. They just stated that. Okay, and then of course, narcissistic personality disorder, we talked about that. Okay, so the only thing I wanted to talk about with the DBT, which is the dialectical behavior therapy, again, they didn't go into a lot of detail. They talked about the AAA training model, which is awareness, acceptance, and action. And I'm not going to get into that, but if you want to look it up, then go right ahead and look it up. Because again, they didn't give enough information for me to even, have any kind of say so or input about it or opinion about it. But the thing that they did talk about that I do want to mention is the emotion dysregulation. So it's a dysfunction of the emotion regulation system caused by a transaction of incompatible biological and environmental factors that occur over time. And so that means absolutely nothing to you. I'm going to try to make it simple for you. So emotional vulnerability, basically. So if and this is genetically defined. So a person who is genetically made up to where they are vulnerable, sensitive to, very emotional kind of people, and you put them in an invalidating rearing environment, which is socially defined, then that equals emotion dysregulation. So let's say that someone who's just genetically sensitive, emotional, vulnerable, and you put them in a social environment where they're invalidated, where they don't get that kind of attention and affection, and they're kind of just written off and neglected and fussed at and that kind of thing, that equals the emotion dysregulation. So that's a part of the biosocial theory in the dialectical behavior therapy. And again, make sure DBT is one of those therapies that, as a clinician, as a therapist, that you probably want to get training in because it's one of those therapies that a lot of people use for personality disorders and other disorders that I hear about all the time. People being trained in it and using DBT and CBT. So gonna skip through that. Now, the last thing I'm gonna talk about here tonight, I did a module in my psychodiagnostics course on gender dysphoria. I don't feel competent to even talk about it because, even learning about it in the module or, learning about it in my psychopathology class, to me, is just not a lot of clear information. And I don't want to offend anybody by giving you wrong information or saying things and that kind of thing. So just make sure that you know about gender dysphoria. It's a new diagnostic class in the DSM-5, and it has its own chapter in the DSM-5, and it's not considered a sexual disorder. So make sure, and gender dysphoria is marked, and according to DSM-5, gender dysphoria is marked incongruence between one's experienced / expressed gender and assigned gender, which causes them distress. I don't know who's running down the stairs screaming, but hopefully nobody's out there getting, killed or whatever, which I would hope not. But anyway, so yeah, that's gender dysphoria. Again, I'm not going to go into it because I don't feel like the information that was given in that module was enough for me to be able to make sense, and I'm not competent, and I don't want to offend anybody. So I don't want to, unless I knew a whole lot more about it, if I knew a lot more about it, I would probably have more to say on it. But again, it's in the DSM-5 and it starts on page 452. So I wanted to talk about the paraphilias just because these are things that we know about that we probably don't talk about on a regular basis, but that are very prevalent also. So a paraphilia is a frequent, intense, sexually arousing fantasy or behavior that involves inanimate objects, children or non-consenting adults, or suffering or humiliation of oneself or a partner. So a paraphilic disorder are paraphilias that cause distress or other problems functioning in the person with the paraphilia, or that harm or may harm another person. So the paraphilias, common paraphilia disorders are pedophilia, voyeurism, transvestism, fetishism, exhibitionism, sexual, I can never pronounce this word, masochism, I don't know, Asphyxiophilia, and sexual sadism, and Frotteurism. So just briefly going to touch on each of these. So, and again, you probably, of course, heard of most of this stuff. We know that pedophilia is against the law, and it's a recurring, intense, sexually arousing fantasy, urges or behaviors involving children, usually 13 and under, for 6 months or more. And of course, again, it's against the law. So that's one of the more common ones, pedophilia, which we pretty much all know about. Voyeurism is becoming sexually aroused by watching an unsuspecting person who was disrobing, naked, or engaging in sexual activity. And so the actual disorder involves acting on voyeuristic urges and fantasies, or being distressed by or unable to function because of those urges and fantasies. And again, this is for 6 months or more. So when someone likes to watch other people get undressed or have sex, or, just watching them being naked, that's voyeurism. Now, a lot of people are voyeuristic, and it's not a disorder, and it's not illegal if you are watching someone with their knowledge. Some people have that kind of thing where they like to watch people. It's just like watching porn, basically, or watching someone disrobe with their consent. Now, when it's not with their consent, that's when it becomes a problem. And it's an actual disorder when it causes distress, or you're not able to function because of those urges and fantasies. So you could be with a partner, spouse, or whoever, and you like to watch them undress, or you like to watch them engage in sex or whatever, and that's voyeurism, but it's not illegal because you have their consent and they know. But if you start watching other people, peeking in on other people, and they don't know, and that's why it says, and you become sexually aroused by watching an unsuspecting person. So if they don't know, and this is where the peeping Toms and all that kind of stuff comes in. So if they don't know that you're in their window watching them, your intent in voyeurism is not to engage in sex, but you just become sexually aroused by watching. And so, like I said, if it's causing you not to be able to function and you are doing this to unsuspecting people, it's a disorder, it's a problem, it's illegal. as opposed to you have consent from a partner and they don't care that you see them naked and that kind of thing. So that's that, voyeurism. Then you have transvestism, involves recurrent, intense sexual arousal from cross-dressing. And then transvestic disorder is transvestism that causes significant distress or substantially interferes with daily functioning for 6 months or more. And most cross-dressers don't have a transvestic disorder. So again, if somebody just likes to cross-dress, if a man likes to wear dresses, or a woman likes to wear boxers or whatever, that could be transvestism, but it's not a disorder just because you like to wear, the opposite genders or opposite sexes clothes. And that's okay. But let's see. But if it causes significant distress or substantially interferes with your daily functioning for 6 months or more, then you have a transvestic disorder. So with some of these, other than pedophilia, the voyeurism, the transvestism, they're not socially unacceptable in most instances, unless you're doing it without consent or illegally, or it becomes a problem when it interferes with your daily functioning and causes you distress for 6 months or more. So then we look at fetishism, which is the use of an inanimate object, which is the fetish, as the preferred way to produce a sexual arousal. So fetishistic disorder is the recurrent, intense sexual arousal from using an inanimate object or focusing on a non-genital body part, such as the foot, and it causes significant distress, substantially interferes with daily functioning, or harms or may harm another person. So like I said, some of this stuff is socially acceptable until it starts causing you distress, and then it turns into a disorder. So you could have fetishism. You could, people have a foot fetish or a back fetish or whatever other kind of fetish, and it's normal to have those fetishes. But when it causes you distress for 6 months or more, in most instances, then it's a disorder. And so that's what we see in each of these, that is saying that you have to have significant impairment or distress in your daily functioning, or that kind of thing. So then we look at exhibitionism, exposing the genitals to become sexually excited or having a strong desire to be observed by other people during sexual activity. And then an exhibitionistic disorder involves acting on exhibitionistic urges or fantasies, or being distressed by or unable to function because of those urges and fantasies for 6 months or more. So just being an exhibitionist is okay. It's socially acceptable, that with consent. I always have to make that clear. So if you're exposing your genitals to become sexually excited or having a strong desire to be observed by other people during sexual activity, it's socially acceptable and it's not illegal with consent. So if you have a partner, a consenting partner or a spouse or whatever, and they are fine with you exposing their genitals to them so that you become sexually excited, or if they're fine, with you having a strong desire to be watched by other people while y'all are having sex, that's fine. But as long as they're consenting, and also it becomes a disorder when it interferes with your daily functioning and causes you distress. So if you always just, have a strong desire to be observed by other people during sex, and you always want to expose yourself, and it's causing you distress because you got to do it, you have to have these urges, you have to do it, everybody needs to watch you, and it's causing you distress, that's a disorder. Now, if you just, it's Friday night and you just want to be watched for whatever reason, then that's just exhibitionism, and it's not a disorder. It's just something that you like with a consenting partner. Sexual masochism. I need to learn how to pronounce that. Let me put this on my list because I need to know. I need to look on Google and type in it and type it in and click that little speaker that tells you how to pronounce stuff because I need to know that one. Okay. So acts in which a person experiences sexual excitement from being humiliated, beaten, bound, or otherwise abused. It becomes a disorder, and it's socially acceptable with a consenting partner, but it becomes a disorder when it causes distress and you're unable to function, or the acts result in severe bodily or psychological harm or even death. So some people are into this. You think about the 50 Shades of Grey and all that kind of stuff. So, sexual masochism, acts in which a person experiences sexual excitement from being humiliated, beaten, bound, or otherwise abused. Some people like that. They want to be beaten, they want to be spanked, they want to be choked, all that kind of stuff. That's masochism. And that's okay, socially acceptable with the consenting person. It becomes a disorder when it causes you distress, you're unable to function, and it results in severe bodily or psychological harm or death. Exhibitionism. And of course, we look at the root word there and we think about asphyxiation. This is autoerotic asphyxiation. And it's a subtype of sexual masochism disorder, which we just talked about. A person experiences sexual excitement from being humiliated. Okay. So Exhibitionism is a subtype of sexual masochism disorder where people partially choke or strangle themselves by applying a noose or scarf or underwear, etc., around their neck to allow their partner to do so. And it causes a temporary decrease of oxygen to the brain at the point of orgasm, and it's sought to enhance the sexual release, but could result in brain damage or death. So basically it's choking or strangling in some sense, so that you could enhance your orgasm basically by temporarily decreasing the oxygen in your brain, but it could cause you to die or cause brain damage. And again, it's under that category of sexual masochism, which, you know, when someone likes being choked or humiliated or beaten and bound. So then we look at sexual sadism. Involves acts in which a person experiences sexual excitement from inflicting physical or psychological suffering on another person. So this is the act of you doing this to somebody else, and that excites you. That's sexual sadism. I got to learn how to pronounce that one too. So, and I was thinking about this as I was taking notes on this because those two can be confusing. So sexual masochism is when you like being humiliated, and sexual sadism is when you like being the person that's inflicting the humiliation. So when I look at sexual masochism starts with an M and me starts with an M. So that means that I get excitement from being humiliated, beaten, or bound, or otherwise abused. And sadism, sexual sadism, sounds like or looks like Satanism, which means that somebody else that's a bad person is inflicting this onto me. So that's how I'm going to memorize these two because they're so similar. So that however you need to process that to help you memorize it. But the sadism is a person experiences sexual excitement from inflicting physical or psychological suffering on another person. So, you know, somebody likes to beat you, they like to choke you, and they get excitement from that. Whereas in masochism, you are the person that likes having that done to you. And again, it's a disorder when it takes the acts to the extreme and there's not a consenting partner. And sexual sadism is not the same thing as rape unless there's no consent. So if a person likes you to beat them and do all this other stuff, then that's not rape unless they're not consenting. That's a societal acceptance. I won't say norm, it's accepted, but unless the person doesn't consent, of course, but it's not the same thing as rape unless they don't consent. Okay. So it says most people with paraphilias are men, and many have more than one type. Some of them also have a severe personality disorder, such as antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. So people in that cluster B of the personality disorders are more likely than not, in some cases, to have, you know, a paraphilia as well. And to me, that makes perfect sense. And then the last thing is Frotteurism, or Frotteurism is the act of touching or rubbing one's genitals up against another in a sexual manner without consent in order to derive sexual pleasure or orgasm. And this is a problem. You know, you can't just go around rubbing your genitals on somebody else without their consent just so that you can get pleasure or orgasm or whatever, and touching people. And this is where you have people out in public in large crowds, you know, sliding by people with an erect penis, or, you know, touching on people and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's illegal, and it's not something that, you know, is socially acceptable. And again, that's Frotteurism. So that's that. This has been a long session. It's an hour and 20 minutes. So hopefully that's been some good information for y'all. Questions or comments? Let me check out Facebook and see what's going on. Again, just while I'm looking for comments on Facebook. Looks like my live feed on Facebook ended. But just for anybody who is interested in the pre-recorded tutoring series, again, it is on special right now from until 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for just $100, which is $150 off the regular rate. So that was a lot. So any questions or comments from anybody on YouTube? If not, then I am going to end this. Please like, share, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Come on to the Facebook page and join that group, Day-to-Day Social Work. And until next time, I'll see y'all later.